can't choose between my children. It's impossible.
The hospital corridor stretched endless and white. Marcus Hartwell stood frozen outside the pediatric ICU, staring through a pane of glass that suddenly felt thicker than concrete. The coffee in his hand had gone cold hours ago. He didn't remember buying it. Inside, two small beds sat side by side. Lily on the left, Noah on the right. Between them on a narrow table rested a small hand-carved wooden rocking horse, half-painted rose pink, half-painted ocean blue. Dr. Okonkwo's voice cut through the hum of machines like a blade. "Mr. Hartwell, a pediatric donor heart has become available," she said calmly, as if calm could soften the sentence. "It's a rare size match for your twins." Marcus didn't breathe. "Both of them?" he asked, his throat raw. "No, one heart," Dr. Okonkwo replied steadily. "The transplant committee needs a primary recipient authorized before midnight. If we cannot accept in time, the heart goes to the next eligible child." Marcus pressed his palm against the glass. His reflection stared back, hollow, unfamiliar. "You're telling me I have to choose which one lives," he whispered, and the words tasted like metal. Dr. Okonkwo didn't answer right away. "I'm telling you that time will choose for you if you don't," she said quietly. The little horse sat perfectly still between his children, split by color and joined by the same carved spine. "What would you do if the world put one heartbeat in your hands and asked you to decide who gets it?" 8 months earlier, June in Milan arrived like a fever dream. Heat rising off stone streets, cameras flashing like lightning, designer logos glowing like neon scripture. Miranda Hartwell moved through it like she belonged to it. Marcus watched her from a step behind, the way he always did in public, half husband, half shadow. Her hair was perfect, her dress sharper than most people's bank accounts, her smile practiced enough to fool strangers into thinking she was happy. She paused near the entrance of a show, lifting her chin as if the whole city needed to memorize her. "Versace always does it bigger here," she murmured with pride, as if she owned Milan. Marcus checked his phone. Another missed call from home. "The nanny says the twins have a cough again," he said, trying to keep his voice even. "Nothing serious, but—" Miranda cut in, irritated, her eyes still on the cameras. "Not now." He lowered the phone. "They're 6, Miranda," he said quietly. "And you hired a nanny, and you hired a doctor, and you hired staff for a reason," she replied coolly, smiling at a photographer. "Let them do their jobs." Marcus swallowed the anger he'd learned to keep behind his teeth. From the outside, they looked untouchable, the billionaire entrepreneur and his flawless wife, walking into a world where everything sparkled. Inside, something was already cracking. Back home, the cough didn't leave. It started small, dry, annoying, easy to blame on school germs. Then it stayed. Then it deepened. Then Lily stopped running as long. Then Noah started napping at odd hours. By the time Marcus flew back to the States, the twins looked like someone had turned the brightness down inside their bodies. Grace Hartwell noticed before anyone else did. Grace wasn't supposed to be the person who saw sickness first. Grace was the grandmother who baked cookies and folded tiny shirts and told bedtime stories with silly voices. But Grace had a way of watching children that was too precise for simple love. One afternoon, she knelt in front of Noah and touched his wrist. "Your heart is racing when you're sitting still," she said with concern. Noah blinked at her, confused. "I'm not doing anything, Nana," he said innocently. Grace's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I know, sweetheart," she said softly. Later, when Marcus found her alone in the kitchen, she didn't waste time. "They need a pediatric cardiologist," she said firmly. Today, Marcus tried to wave it off at first. He wanted to believe it was nothing, but he'd learned a long time ago that his mother didn't panic. Not unless there was a reason. Dr. Okonkwo confirmed what Grace feared. The twins had a congenital condition so rare that the first specialist they saw had to look it up twice to be sure. Medication helped for a short while. It was false hope disguised as progress. The twins laughed again. They played again. Marcus told himself it would be okay. Miranda told herself she could ignore it. Then the medication stopped working. Lily collapsed during breakfast, her body going limp like a puppet with its strings cut. Marcus caught her before her head hit the floor. "Call an ambulance," he shouted, terrified. Noah screamed her name. "Lily! Lily! Wake up!" he cried, panicked. At the hospital, the word critical entered Marcus's life and never left. Dr. Okonkwo sat across from him in a conference room that smelled like sanitizer and bad news. We've exhausted standard treatments, she told him soberly. Their hearts are failing faster than expected. Marcus leaned forward like leaning could change reality. Then we do whatever comes next, he said through clenched teeth. I'll fund whatever comes next. Dr. Okonkwo didn't flinch. Money doesn't create pediatric donor hearts, she replied gently. Marcus's jaw tightened. It creates everything else, he said bitterly. It doesn't create time, she said, and her voice held no cruelty, only truth. When Marcus walked into the ICU the first time and saw his children connected to machines, something inside him broke in a way he couldn't repair with a deal. That night, he sat in the dark of his car outside the hospital, watching his own hands tremble on the steering wheel. He had built an empire from nothing. He had bought companies like people bought shoes. He had conquered rooms with a smile. And now, he couldn't buy a heartbeat for his children. If you've ever loved something more than your own life, you understand this kind of fear. If you want the rest of this story, every secret, every betrayal, stay with me and subscribe. Miranda came to the hospital once. She stood at the foot of the beds like a visitor in a museum, eyes scanning machines the way she scanned price tags. Marcus watched her hands. They were perfectly manicured. Not once did she reach for the twins. Hold her hand, he pleaded, his voice breaking. Just hold her hand. Miranda's throat worked like she was swallowing glass. I can't, she said shakily. You can't, or you won't, he snapped, anger shaking loose. Her eyes shot to his, glossy with something that wasn't love. I grew up watching people die, Marcus, she said, brittle. I promised myself I would never live in that world again. Marcus stared at her. They're not people, he said, hurt spilling into his voice. They're your children. Miranda's breathing sped up. Don't make me stay here, she whispered, avoiding his eyes. Marcus felt something cold crawl up his spine. Where would you go? He asked, low and steady. Paris. Dubai. Anywhere that doesn't smell like this, she answered thinly. Marcus didn't stop her when she left, not because he didn't care, because in that moment he understood he couldn't force someone to be a mother. You either are or you aren't. And Miranda was running. 3 weeks later, the call came. Dr. Okonkwo's number lit up. Marcus's phone at 2:17 a.m. His heart nearly stopped before she even spoke. Mr. Hartwell, we found a pediatric donor heart, she said urgently. A 6-year-old from a car accident. The size match is extraordinary. Marcus stood up so fast his chair fell backward. Both twins can receive it, he asked, choking on hope. There was a pause. The organ can only go to one child, she said somberly. Both Lily and Noah meet matching criteria. Only one can be listed as the primary recipient in this window. Marcus felt his vision blur. You're telling me it's perfect, and it still isn't enough, he said, shattered. The recipient decision must be finalized before midnight, Dr. Okonkwo continued, serious. If you cannot authorize a plan,
I
the
can't
heart goes
choose
to the
between
next
my
eligible
children.
child. That is how this system works.
It's impossible.
Marcus's mouth opened, but no sound came out. When he returned to the hospital, the ICU lights looked harsher than before. He walked into the room and stared at Lily's face, then Noah's. How do you measure love? How do you weigh two souls when the scale only allows one? Footsteps approached behind him. He expected a nurse. He expected another doctor. He did not expect his mother. Grace walked in quietly, carrying a bag that looked too heavy for her small frame. Marcus turned, desperate enough to grab onto anything. They want me to choose, he said, broken. Grace's eyes settled on the monitors, then on the twins, then back on Marcus. You don't, she said simply. Marcus blinked. What? He asked, confused. You don't choose between your children, Grace said firmly. Marcus let out a short, bitter breath. Mom, the committee needs a yes before midnight, he said, voice shaking. If I don't decide, the heart goes to someone else and my kids. Grace lifted her hand. Dr. Okonkwo only knows what she knows, she said calmly. Marcus stared at her. And what do you know? He asked, suspicion rising. Grace opened her bag and pulled out a thick folder, manila, worn at the edges, stuffed with papers that looked handled 1,000 times. She set it on the table and opened it with steady hands. Marcus saw email chains. Names, hospitals, Zurich, Tokyo, Berlin. Marcus frowned. Why do you have this? He asked, uneasy. Grace didn't answer right away. She sat down, like she'd been carrying this moment for decades. Because I never stopped, she said softly. Marcus's breath caught. Never stopped what? He pressed. Grace looked at him, and for the first time Marcus saw the woman behind the grandmother, the woman who had lived a whole life before him. 30 years ago, before you were born, Grace said quietly. I had a different name in hospitals. Marcus's skin prickled. What are you talking about? He asked, startled. Grace's voice didn't shake. Dr. Emily Chen Hartwell, she said measuredly, chief of pediatric cardiology. Marcus stared, waiting for her to smile and say she was joking. She didn't. You told me you were a housewife, he said, shocked. That's what they needed me to become after they took everything else, Grace replied, and something bitter lived under the words. Marcus felt the room tilt. Who took it? He asked, hoarse. Grace flipped to a page with a familiar name. Dr. Richard Brennan, she said coldly. Marcus blinked, the name stirring something he couldn't place. I developed a protocol for children like Lily and Noah, Grace continued. Regenerative cardiac tissue repair. It was years ahead of its time. Marcus stared at the words, barely processing. And it works? He asked urgently. Grace's eyes flickered with grief. It should have saved thousands, she said quietly. Why didn't it? Marcus demanded, panic and fury mixing. Brennan stole it, Grace said, resentful. He published it under his name. Then he used his influence to destroy mine. License suspended, blacklisted, my career erased. Marcus's hands curled into fists. Why didn't you fight him? He asked, angry on her behalf. Grace's gaze softened. Because I was pregnant with you, she said softly, and I knew what they'd do if I tried. Marcus couldn't breathe. Everything he believed about his mother rearranged itself in his head like collapsing buildings. Then Grace slid another page forward. It showed recent dates, recent procedures, successful outcomes. Marcus's eyes widened. These are from the last 5 years, he said, stunned. Grace nodded. I kept working privately, she said, hushed. Quietly, I built a team overseas who would listen. Zurich trusted the science. Marcus leaned in, reading names and case numbers. 14 children, he whispered. 14 lives, Grace answered. Pride restrained but unmistakable. Marcus looked up, hope rushing in so fast it hurt. Can it save Lily and Noah? He asked. Grace held his gaze. Yes, she said firmly, without a donor heart. Marcus's throat worked. Then why are we standing here? He asked, staggered. Grace's expression didn't soften. Because this only works if we move now, she said seriously. And because you need to understand something. What? Marcus asked, barely able to breathe. If you accept that donor heart tonight, you save one child and lose the other, Grace said, sober. If you refuse it and we fly them to Zurich, we gamble on my protocol and try to save both. Marcus's body went cold. That's not a gamble, he whispered. That's everything. Grace nodded once. Yes, she said steadily. It is. Grace stepped out to speak with Dr. Okonkwo, leaving Marcus alone with the machines and the glass and the unbearable quiet. His eyes fell on the wooden horse between the beds. Half pink, half blue, one toy, 2 hearts, one choice. The carved spine where the colors met seemed sharper now, a dividing line he was being forced to walk. Marcus looked at Lily's still face, then Noah's. He tried to imagine living in a world where one laugh survived and the other disappeared. He couldn't. When Grace returned, Marcus didn't sound brave. He sounded honest. We go to Zurich, he said hoarsely. We try to save both. If you need to know what Marcus decides, hit subscribe, because what happens next changes everything. The next 48 hours blurred together. Dr. Okonkwo read Grace's research in silence, her face tightening as she turned each page. Marcus waited for her to dismiss it as fantasy. Instead, she looked up with something like awe. This is decades ahead of current protocols, she said, stunned. Can you approve transport? Marcus asked urgently. Dr. Okonkwo hesitated, conflict flickering across her face. If anything goes wrong in the air, she began. If we keep them here, they die waiting, Grace cut in firmly. Dr. Okonkwo's jaw clenched. I'll make the calls, she said, resolved. The ethics consult happened fast. Paperwork piled. Consent forms multiplied like a nightmare. The transplant committee was informed that the Hartwells were declining the donor offer. The heart went to another child. Marcus didn't know their name. He only prayed silently that somewhere another set of parents would not be asked to choose. By nightfall, a private medical jet waited on the runway. Grace sat between the twins during the flight, one hand resting on Lily's blanket, the other on Noah's. Marcus sat across from them, staring at the monitors like staring could hold them steady. Outside the small window, the world was dark. Inside, Marcus watched his mother's face. She looked calm, too calm. He realized she wasn't calm because she didn't fear losing them. She was calm because she had lived inside fear for 30 years and learned how to keep breathing anyway. Halfway over the Atlantic, Noah stirred. His eyes opened briefly, unfocused. "Buddy, can you hear me?" Marcus asked softly. "Daddy, are we going home?" Noah asked, exhausted. "We're going somewhere that can help you," Marcus said gently. "Okay," Noah whispered. Then his eyes closed again. Marcus sat back and stared at his own reflection in the dark window. Who was he now? A billionaire? A father? A man begging the sky to let him keep his children? He had been taught his whole life that winning was everything. Now he understood something else. Surviving was. The clinic in Zurich was small but immaculate, tucked away like a secret the world didn't deserve. The team greeted Grace with a respect that made Marcus's chest ache. A lead surgeon, a man with silver hair and tired eyes, shook Marcus's hand. "We have been preparing the operating rooms based on Dr. Chen Hartwell's protocols," he said evenly. Grace didn't correct him. It was the first time Marcus saw his mother allow her old self to exist in front of strangers. Subscribe now. 14 hours will decide if both hearts survive, or if everything Grace built was for nothing. The procedures began at dusk, 14 hours. 2 children, 1 impossible night. Marcus paced until his legs trembled. He sat. He stood. He paced again. Grace waited in stillness. Hands folded, eyes closed, not praying to God, but to the science she'd protected like a flame in a storm. At 7:12 a.m., the lead surgeon emerged. Marcus's heart stopped. He couldn't read the man's face. He couldn't read the world. He could only wait. "Mr. Hartwell," the surgeon said calmly. Marcus's voice came out cracked. "Please," he managed. The surgeon nodded once. "Both procedures were successful," he said, reassuring. "Lily and Noah are stable. Their cardiac function is improving already." Marcus's knees buckled. He sank into a chair, hands covering his face as a sound escaped him, half sob, half laugh. Grace finally broke. She pressed her palm against her mouth and cried silently, shoulders shaking. After everything they had endured, the miracle felt almost unreal. 5 days later, the twins opened their eyes. "Daddy," Lily said weakly, and her voice barely made it past her lips. "I'm here," Marcus whispered. Noah's eyes fluttered open next. He stared for a moment, then frowned. Noah looked confused. "Why is everybody crying?" he asked. Marcus laughed through tears. "Because you scared us," he said softly. "Sorry," Noah murmured, and his mouth twitched like he was trying to smile. "Did we win?" Lily asked tenderly, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to hope. "Yes, baby," Marcus said, choked with emotion. "You did." While the twins recovered, Miranda remained silent. No calls, no messages, no flowers, nothing. Marcus told himself he hated her. Some days he did. Other days he just felt empty. Fear, he learned, doesn't always make villains. Sometimes it just breaks people, and sometimes you can fix what fear destroys. 6 months later, spring warmed the Hartwell estate. The twins ran through the garden, laughter bouncing off old oak trees like music. Their cheeks were pink again, their eyes bright, their hearts, both of them, beat strong enough to carry them into whatever futures they chose. Grace sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching them the way she always had. Marcus stepped beside her. "Mom," he said quietly. Grace replied softly. Marcus stared at the children a long moment. "Thank you," he said, his voice low with gratitude, "for never giving up, for saving them, for saving me." Grace patted his hand. "That's what mothers do," she said warmly. Marcus noticed something on the porch railing, a small envelope. No address, no stamp, just paper, waiting like a question. "What's that?" he asked, uneasy. "It wasn't there last night," Grace said, confused. Marcus picked it up and opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Miranda, the twins, taken at their 2nd birthday party before the diagnosis, before the ICU, before everything cracked apart. On the back, Miranda's handwriting pressed into the paper. "I'm sorry I couldn't stay. I'm glad they had you. Tell them their mother loved them, even when she didn't know how to show it." Marcus read it once, then again. His jaw tightened. His chest hurt. He didn't forgive her. Not yet, maybe not ever. But the hatred softened into something else. Understanding. Not excuse. Not mercy. Just understanding. That night, after the twins fell asleep, Grace sat at her desk in the dark, laptop glowing. A new email waited from Zurich. Her breath caught as she read it. The world that had erased her was finally speaking her name. A consortium of physicians had reviewed her work. They wanted her on record. They wanted proper attribution. They wanted her to lead the next phase. Her life's work stolen, buried, mocked, was rising again. Grace stared at the screen for a long time. She thought of the twins running in the garden. She thought of every child still waiting somewhere. Then she placed her fingers on the keys. Yes, she whispered. It's time. Some stories end with headlines and applause. This one ended with two children laughing in a garden as sunlight faded into evening. On the porch railing nearby sat a small hand-carved wooden rocking horse. Half rose pink, half ocean blue. One piece, two colors, one story. Perhaps that was miracle enough. But sometimes late at night, Grace wondered about that envelope. Miranda was thousands of miles away. How had the photograph appeared on the porch? Had someone delivered it? Had she come back? Just for one quiet moment? Just to leave proof of something she couldn't say out loud? Some mysteries don't demand answers. They demand silence. This story was inspired by real events. Names, locations, and certain details have been changed, and events have been dramatized for narrative purposes. How would you rate this story out of 10? Tell us in the comments. To support the channel, subscribe and turn on notifications.